Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are on the face of this earth, and welcome to our last part of the four-part webinar series of the DCP. I'm your host and moderator today. I'm Professor Daniel Olago, Research Director of the Institute for Climate Change and Adaptation at the University of Nairobi. So in this particular last series, and the series in general, we have been focusing on showcasing some of the research work which we have been undertaking under the Development Corridors Partnership Program. And in this series, we've been focusing on the issue of the general theme of from issue infrastructure to development corridors. And the partnership has been supported by the UKRI Global Challenges Research Fund and the Development Partnership Project, or DCP as we commonly refer to it, is today focusing on our work in Kenya. And here in Kenya, we have two institutions, the African Conservation Center, ACC, as well as the Institute for Climate Change and Adaptation, who are leading this series today. So you have seen in our introductory video, the issues that we explore, development corridors, and looking at how we can ensure sustainable outcomes of infrastructure for all citizens while we conserve the unique biodiversity of East Africa, as well as other natural assets that are all impacted upon by development corridor infrastructure and development. Today, we are going to hear from Dr. Catherine Sang, and we also have a number of panelists who will follow on thereafter, and I'll be introducing them as we move on. So right now, I'd just like to cover some housekeeping. One is that we'll be recording the meeting today. So if you have any issues, do let us know. And there's in the chat box, there's someone that you can communicate with there. Microphones are muted and cameras are turned off during the webinar. And if you do have any comment or question, you can use the chat box function. And if you want to direct it to a particular presenter or speaker, please include their name. And if there are any technical issues, you can also direct your message to the person in the chat box. Now, before we go on to our presentation, we want to put forward to you a number of poll questions. And those should be coming up any second now. And we have 3 questions, so have a good look at each one of them, make your choice and submit it. Thank you. Can we have poll question 2? And lastly, poll question 3. Okay, so we will be coming back to look at what the outcome is from those poll questions. Now it is my pleasure to introduce to you Dr. Catherine Sang, who is a postdoctoral scientist at the Institute for Climate Change and Adaptation, University of Nairobi. and she'll be talking on the topic of water security in the standard gauge railway corridor in Kenya. Dr. Sang is an environmental scientist with an experience of over 10 years in research, and she holds a PhD in environmental information systems from the University of Eldoret in Kenya. And she's a postdoctoral fellow in the Development Corridors Partnership Project and a Women in Climate Change Science Fellow at the African Institute for Mathematical Sciences. Catherine is also a lecturer at the Department of Environmental Planning and Management at University of Eldoret. And her research interests focus on long-term solutions to water management and accessibility issues while developing best practices for inclusive and sustainable economic growth, climate change resilience, and any other risks, including anthropogenic. She has published several papers in peer-reviewed journals, and she's also an EIA expert and a registered member of the Environment Institute of Kenya. Catherine, welcome to give your presentation. You need to unmute.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Okay, yeah, good afternoon and good morning, everyone. And thank you very much, Prof. And thank you everyone for joining in. So our discussion.
Catherine.
Our discussion today is on water security in the standard gauge railway, that is the SGR corridor, which is in Kenya, and it is part of the Northern Transport Corridor, and also one of the flagship projects under the Vision 2030. So my presentation is divided into 5 sections as shown. So we have the introduction, the corridor characteristics, corridor impact, then some preliminary results on the assessment of water balance in Mbagathi-Stony Athi watersheds, and lastly, options for water security in the corridor. So first, I would like to start by defining what we mean by water security. And as it is defined by Sustainable Water Partnership 2021, it is the adaptive capacity to safeguard the availability of, access to, and safe use of an adequate, reliable, and resilient quantity and quality of water for health, livelihoods, ecosystems, and economies. So why are we worried about water security? It is because water is actually a vital natural resource, and as it underpins all the economic sectors and supports livelihoods as well as environment. And a point to note is that approximately 80% of the world's population is already exposed to high levels of threat to water security. And also approximately 1.7 billion are experiencing chronic high water scarcity. And so water insecurity is actually increasing, and this is due to increasing.
Sorry, Catherine, I think it's become accidentally muted again.
So
yes.
Where did I start from?
From your 4th point, I think, the 4th bullet, water security is increasing. Okay,
thank you. So I'm saying that water insecurity is increasing due to increasing pressure on the global water resources. And it has been observed that demand is beginning to surpass supply, and demand is really increasing. Demand is driven by risk factors such as population growth and economic development, while on the other hand, supply has been impacted both in terms of quantity and quality by climate change and environmental degradation. So we are saying that if business as usual approach is maintained in the way we manage our resources, then the world population will face a 40% gap between available fresh water supply and demand, while in Kenya, we'll face 30% gap by the year 2030. So why assess water security in development corridors, and particularly in Kenya? This is because Kenya first is a water scarce country, as its per capita available water resources are estimated at 452 cubic meters per year. And also we note that pollution is very common and water supply infrastructure is underdeveloped. And also currently our water coverage is at 57%. So only 25% of the population has access to safely managed services. That means the majority cannot access these water services. And there is also, we are worried about the rising competing demands that is brought about by population pressure, economic development, irrigation enhancement. And these are aggravated by risks such as climate change and environmental degradation. And we also observe that water for ecosystems has not been given the attention that it deserves. And water scarcity actually has some implication for food security, irrigation, and the economy. So we assess water security in development corridors because of the need. We really feel that there is need to factor in water in corridor development planning, especially in a country like Kenya, which is largely ASAL and is water scarce. So we have two questions that we intend to answer through our research, and we are asking ourselves, is the water in the corridor sufficient for the development, its associated spin-offs, and at the same time meet the water needs of multiple and competing users in the corridors and its sphere of influence? And another question is, what is the impact of the development on the water quantity and quality? And to be able to answer these questions, we assessed water resources in the SGR corridor, and with the view of setting a basis for further evaluation of the impacts of economic development and climate change, land use changes, and demographic changes on water resources. And thereafter, we intend to propose adaptive, nature, and people-sensitive intervention measures in the corridors and beyond. So our study or research focused on the SGR corridor, which runs from Mombasa to Kisumu, and we collected data from 5 sites within the developed sections of the SGR. That is phase 1 and phase 2A. So phase 1 begins from Mombasa to Athi River, and phase 2 is from Athi River to Suswa in Narok County. And within these 5 sites, we did we conducted household surveys and also conducted key informant interviews. And also we are doing some water balance assessments using the water evaluation and planning tool in catchments within these study sites. So we involved various methods that are listed here, sites, and what we are also saying is that there is a challenge in management of water, because this corridor traverses many counties, as we can see on this map, and also traverses many basins. It actually traverses 4 out of the 6 basins, major basins in Kenya. So we analyzed corridor characteristics, and we looked at climate, both historical and projected rainfall and temperature. And we found that rainfall has been increasing, though it is not significant. And while temperature has also increased, that is from 1981 to 2020. And the rainfall, the temperature is increasing significantly. And on the projected temperature and rainfall, we used an ensemble of 3 models, and we considered 2 climate scenarios, that's 4.5 and 8.5. And we also found that rainfall trends are gradually increasing for both scenarios, that is the RCP 4.5 and RCP 8.5. But for the climate scenario RCP 4.5, we found that the trend is insignificant, while temperature has been increasing and is significant in both scenarios. So we have observed that, we have found that temperature has been increasing through the historical analysis of the historical data, and is also expected to increase. And this will have an implication on water resources, since it has an impact on the hydrological cycle. Then we also looked at the land use, land cover. We found that shrublands occupy most of the corridor, and forest has been declining over time, and so is water and wetlands, and bare lands have been increasing. So this decrease in forest might have caused a decline in water, as shown by the evidence of decrease in the area covered by water in the study area. We also looked at the water sources in the corridor, and we found that the water sources vary across the 5 study sites. For example, the majority of those who use tap water in the house are in Taita Taveta, as compared to these other, the other study sites, while those who use boreholes, boreholes are very popular in the Mbagathi-Stony Athi catchment area, and also the vended water. We also found that water accessibility is still an issue, given that only 36% of the respondents receive water 7 days a week. And we also found that vended water, the use of vended water has been increasing, which means that access to the main water supply has declined over time, as shown on this graph. We also analyzed some indicators of water quality, and we found that most of the respondents reported that their water is clear, except in Mombasa, where we found some of them using turbid water, and some said that their water had visible suspended matter. While on the smell of water, we found that majority of the respondents did not have any problem with their water. They said that their water did not smell. And on water tests, there was an issue in Kibwezi and Mbagathi-Stony Athi, where most of the water is salty. And despite some of these issues on water quality, most of the respondents reported that they were not treating their water. On water uses, we found that most of the highest water uses are agriculture and domestic. And we found that population is increasing and is expected to increase. So is the livestock population, as well as irrigated area is expanding. And if all these expand at the same rate, then water demand will go up, and we'll have more water issues in future. So we also found that there is a serious situation. There is actually a varying water balance between basins, where the Athi basin has a very high water demand, water resource ratio compared to the other basins. So this can be addressed by interbasin water transfer, so that we have the basins that have more, where we can transfer water from the basins that have more to those that are water scarce. Then we also analyzed some of the water provision performance of some of the water service providers along the SGR corridor. And we found that the water coverage, the non-revenue water percentage, the drinking water quality, and also hours of supply were all below the acceptable standards internationally. So some impacts on water resources. So we found that the SGR and other projects associated with it, because within this SGR, we have roads, we have the ICDs, that's the inland container depots, such as the one in Naivasha. We have oil pipelines and many other projects. And we found that some natural water channels have been blocked by these development projects and are redirected. So this has caused some reduced river flows and water shortages downstream. We also found that most of the water infrastructure were designed for a specific number of users, and without considering future development projects, so that when these projects come, the demand goes up and the water supply is put under pressure. And there is also a lack of planning for the water needs for projects. And also the relevant key agencies are not most of the time involved effectively. Then issues to do with the wetlands that were adversely affected by stone quarry for concrete, and the water table was significantly affected. Some pipelines that are supplying communities were not relocated, so they are still under the railways, and if they burst, they may cause soil erosion of the embankments. Then we also have the water being directed underwater, underpasses, and these are causing gully erosion and hence siltation of water bodies. A lot of flash floods were observed in some areas where, due to confinement of waterways into common single channels. And on the other hand, as much as we had so many negative impacts, we also have some communities that benefited from water resources developed by the SGR, such as tap water was connected, some boreholes and water pumps were handed over after the construction was completed. So some results from Mbagathi-Stony Athi watersheds water assessment, and we used the water evaluation and planning tool to assess the water balance of Mbagathi and Stony Athi, and we analyzed various scenarios up to the year 2063, that is in line with the African Agenda 2063. So the reference scenario is the business as usual. Then we have population growth rate which will decline as projected, the high urbanization growth rate, climate change 8.5, among others. And so during the baseline, that is the 2000 to 2019, the results showed that the water demand has been going up, and the unmet or the deficit has also been increasing. And this is mainly due to population growth and urbanization. Then we looked at the water demand according to the various sources, and we found that the highest water user is the domestic. The highest demand is for domestic, followed by irrigation. Then we also looked at the baseline period surface runoff, that is the historical from 2000 to 2019. And we found that there is a slight increase, and that there is a slight increase in surface runoff. And this can be harvested and stored to enhance water availability in the corridors and reduce floods. As we can see on this graph, there is a slight increase, though it's not significant. Water demand, under various scenarios, we saw that the water demand in future as projected will increase, though will increase in all the scenarios, with the highest being under the urbanization growth rate, a higher urbanization growth rate. And the population growth scenario shows that towards 2063, the water demand will be less than the reference scenario, that is the business as usual scenario. Then the unmet demands also will increase in future, that it means we'll have more water deficit, and this varies in magnitude across the scenarios. And the water deficit will be higher in the urbanization scenario, followed by the minimum flow requirement scenario, where we make sure that we retain some water to sustain the estuarine ecosystem. So, so we really control abstraction, and thus that explains why the water deficit will be higher. The climate change scenario under RCP 8.5 shows a slight decline from the reference scenario. And we are saying that due to uncertainties posed by climate change and increase in demand due to expansion in irrigation and population growth, water scarcity will be more and more severe in the future if current water management and development approach is maintained. We also looked at the surface runoff under various scenarios that's projected, and we found that it will be higher under the RCP 8.5 scenario. And in the reference scenario, that's business as usual, it will reduce slightly. We looked at the mean monthly stream flows just to see how the flows will behave across the month. And we found that the mean monthly stream flow will be higher under the RCP 8.5 scenario. And the minimum flows will be higher under the minimum flow or the environmental flow requirement scenario, as we can see here. And urbanization and population growth will have minimal effect on the stream flow. So what are the options that we have for us to be able to attain water security? So for us to attain water security, we for ecosystems and society, the attainment of water security for society and ecosystem should be anchored on risk-based assessments, where we look at the current and future supply and demand, and also try to explore various alternative sources, such as the construction of dams to store and to harvest and store water, desalination of saline water, among many other options. And also to strengthen, we recommend that to strengthen water security, we will need to invest in institutional strengthening, information management, innovative technologies, and infrastructure development. And also for us to attain water security, we also need to improve on stakeholder and community involvement at all stages of a project, so that all the impacts on the water and also environment can be identified, and the impacts and minimize the impact, the negative impacts. Also, we recommend that the coordination amongst institutions to implement cross-sectoral solutions for sustainable water resource management and adaptive management initiatives should be enhanced. We should also incorporate climate and anthropogenic changes in the planning and adaptive management of sources, supplies, and uses of water in the corridor. And this we can use models to be able to do this. Strategies addressing water security should be evidence-based, so including water balance, the spatial and temporal dimensions, as well as the supply and demand scenarios. So that is why we have done all this, to be able to collect some evidence that we can use to inform our decision makers and policy makers. And groundwater abstraction can be undertaken sustainably to supply the corridor with sufficient water, especially since in East Africa, there are indications that recharge will be higher in the future. And to ensure, we should also ensure rapid dissemination and appropriate adaptation or application of all these initiatives. And these are key, as these are key to strengthening global water security. So what the key messages that I would like to put across are the water resources assessment and accounting should be factored in more adequately in the planning and implementation of development projects. I'm also of the opinion that scenario analysis is key to the assessment of water security in an uncertain future. And to enhance water supply, we need to do more intensive groundwater abstraction, and it should be more sustainable. It should be done sustainably. We should also try and do inter-basin water transfers and rainwater harvesting, and these will enhance water supply in our corridors and also beyond. There are challenges. For example, planning for water resources in the corridors has been a challenge due to lack of information and efficient planning tools. And also there is a challenge in terms of coordination amongst institutions to implement cross-sectoral solutions for sustainable water resources and management. So if all these challenges are addressed and all these measures are put in place, then we'll be able to achieve water security and ultimately achieve sustainable development in our corridors, in our country, and beyond. So that is the end. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you very much, Catherine, for that broad and informative presentation. You covered many issues on water security, mainly the scarcity and water supply and demand. You looked also at the cross-sectoral nature of water issues, which was quite important. and also examined the risks related to climate change, as well as human factors, and also social factors and perceptions about water, which came out quite clearly. And also the environmental factors that we should never forget about, because that is where our water is coming from. And I did, of course, like the idea of the planning and adaptive management scenarios that you talked about, which generally we seem to be missing, and that stakeholders need to be involved. And we'll be coming over to the panelists in a bit, but at this point, I would still like to encourage our audience to put in questions into the chat, and we'll be addressing them. But before we get to the panelists, we will have a run through our poll questions. And then after the panel discussion, we should be able to take on a couple of questions and address what is in the chat box. So in relation to water, the major water resources concerns or challenges which are associated with mega infrastructure developments in whichever country you're from, the main concern is environmental impacts at 29%, and followed by reduced accessibility to water, water scarcity, and poor water quality at 14% each. So I think this is mainly because nothing is really standing out as really key except for the environmental impacts. And it could be perhaps because of the cross-sectoral nature and the perspective that we are looking at them from. What about number 2 and 3? Poll question 2, what are the stressors or controlling factors that impede your region from achieving water security and its poor management of water resources? And closely following that is public and political awareness, and lastly, the lack of funds. And the last one, and here suggests the most efficient strategies to enhance water security in your country or region. And most have said that implementation of integrated water resources management at 41% takes the cake, the biggest chunk of the cake, and then extensive stakeholder and community engagement comes in second at 15%. Thank you very much for your poll questions and answers. And let's now go over to the panelists. And I'll start off by introducing them. Dr. Owor, if you could put on your video, and Mr. Mai as well. Yes, so I'll start off with Dr. Okoth. Dr. Okoth is a Principal Water Resources Officer at the Ministry of Water, Sanitation and Irrigation in Kenya. And he holds a PhD degree in hydrogeology from Freiburg University. And he has been working in the ministry for now slightly over 12 years, before which he was working in the private sector, so brings in a lot of experience from private sector as well. And he has also been partially involved for a period of time, I think, as he was undertaking his PhD as a tutorial fellow in the Southeastern Kenya University. And then I'd like to move on to introduce Professor Declan Conway. Declan Conway is Professorial Research Fellow at the Grantham Research Institute on Climate Change and the Environment in the London School of Economics. His research cuts across water, climate, and society, and strongly focuses on adaptation and the water-energy-food nexus. He's a geographer, and so naturally draws insights from different disciplines to pursue the problems that he focuses on in his research. And he has over 20 years of experience working in Europe and in sub-Saharan Africa, as well as in Asia. And we are looking forward to also getting then that a very much wider perspective from Europe and Asia as we go into the panel discussion. Then we have Patrick Mai, who is a Program Management Officer at the United Nations Environment Programme, and is based within the Science Division. And he holds a master's degree in Rural Resource Management from Bangor University in the UK. And before he joined UNEP, he has actually had a lot of work experience in the Kenya government, working in the Environment Protection Office, and wherein he carried out also quite a number of different related projects. And in UNEP, he has led, coordinated, and participated in a number of groundwater assessment projects, looking at pollution, vulnerability of rivers, lakes, and wetlands, how they behave in the context of climate change, and also development at regional and global levels. And he has also contributed to some of the initiatives of the African Ministerial Council on Water, and currently he is the point person coordinating activities between the International Lake Environment Committee and the United Nations Environment Programme. So now I think I'll go straight off to our questions, and I think I'll direct my first question to Dr. Okoth. We have, let's talk about water sources, where all this water basically comes from. We have, strategies. We talk about strategies to enhance water security. And there, of course, some like intensification of groundwater utilization, desalinization of saline water, and others. How come we have not seen this uptake of these new technologies, within our national context here? Do you have any views about that, and any proposals as to how we can make that better?
Thank you very much, Professor. The main hindrance towards uptake of some of this technology, for example, desalinization, is the high cost of power and running cost to maintain these machines which are used for desalinization. So you find that in Kenya, generally, the power is not very stable, and desalinization requires a lot of power. So this is one of major hindrances. Another big problem is, how do you dispose of the sludge? Once you've done the recycling of the water from the seawater, how do you dispose of the sludge? This is also still not very well understood, or how to handle it, and therefore it has hindered the implementation of this technology. The other reason is that water recycling, also there is a challenge, because you find that in the factories where you get the water which can be recycled, there is very heavy load of contaminants which come from these factories, and therefore you can still not recycle them because the load is very heavy. So recycling them is quite a challenge. Another problem is that the storm water and the sewer systems still get mixed up, and therefore when it is mixed up, even treating it is still very, very complicated. So that really hinders the use of the recycling water. Groundwater issues, you find that all the aquifers, all the major aquifers, they have not been fully understood. And so you cannot implement technologies for borehole or groundwater intensification, because we don't still understand fully how much water resources we have in the groundwater. So that brings a big challenge. And another issue related to that is that you find that there is still also a lot of illegal abstractors or illegal boreholes which are being drilled in Kenya here. So when you have illegal boreholes, it's quite difficult to estimate the actual amount of water which is being abstracted from these aquifers.
Thank you very much, Dr. Okoth, for those. I think you have raised 5 key points in that area, and I think that is sufficient for now. I would like to move on to Professor Conway, and let's look at this issue of decision support tools and risk-based approaches to managing water resources. So we see that water resources, managing them in a general sense is quite a big challenge, and we think so too in development corridors, where they spur growth and things move on much faster on the ground, as was projected in design plans and in other planning tools and documents. So what are your thoughts on this issue, and how can we try and improve this situation? And also considering that all this is happening within the context of risks that are related to population growth and climate change. Over to you, Declan.
Okay, thanks very much, Professor Olago, for giving me this opportunity. So we've already heard from Dr. Sang about some of the issues that are faced with the large-scale infrastructure developments in river basins. There are cross-sectoral impacts. There are cross-jurisdictional impacts that create many management and governance challenges to the effective and sustainable management in these areas. With climate change, in terms of risk assessment, risk-based approaches, we need to be thinking about some of the impacts and changes that Dr. Sang mentioned, not least a change in variability of river flows, increase in the frequency, intensity of heat waves, and particularly an increase because of higher rainfall intensities, other things being equal, a higher frequency and intensity of flood events. So some of the requirements that are important for this in terms of information use, I think that critically we need to make sure that we're, as we've heard, collecting information. The information that we do collect needs to be accessible, it needs to be understandable, it needs to be reliable and relevant. And this requires, I think, that very often stakeholders are involved in data collection processes, that they can be effectively involved then, if the data are appropriate, they can be involved in decision-making processes so that the consequences of decisions can be appreciated by the people that they affect, and also, of course, impacts on the environment. How do we achieve this? I mean, it's easy for us to identify the challenges, but I think that there is some reason for optimism. Fundamentally, we need to recognise that at a basic level, the planning systems need to be in place and they need to be followed, and that this requires political will and legitimacy for those involved in the process. And they need to be confident that the process is going to be effective. But then there are a lot of emerging opportunities for enhanced and improved data use. I think things through sourcing of data from remote sensing platforms, lots of technological innovation there, data from modeling systems. There are new global flood forecasting systems that are becoming at very, very high resolution, and significant improvements in the visualization and the user interactions with these types of platforms that provides more opportunities for engaging with people over the kinds of trade-offs that might occur through the developments that we're thinking of. And then finally, to think about some of the qualitative scenario planning that Dr. Sang has referred to a little bit, that there are opportunities to integrate both quantitative information and qualitative information. And these processes need facilitation and people with the skills to facilitate them. And we also need to be aware, I think, about making sure that at international or national levels, we don't run away with the process. We keep our feet firmly planted on the ground in relation to the communities and the levels at which things are happening and where people are affected by the outcomes of decisions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Declan. Let me pan over to Patrick Mai, and maybe you've heard about the issues that have been raised in terms of governance, that there are in cases weak and fragmented governance when you're looking at water resources and water security issues. And in addition to that, we also find that there are some weaknesses in the science policy interface. So can you make some suggestions as to how this can be addressed and improved in order to improve on the water security situation in our countries?
Thank you very much, Prof, for the opportunity to be able to join into this discussion. I want to give just a little bit of a view of how the country is. If you look at the corridors that we are talking about, the corridors crisscross the semi-arid parts of the country, and then a little bit into the area that is more greener if you look at the map of Kenya. And you'll notice that it is not an issue of so much of not having plans. Because when I look and when I hear from what Dr. Sang has given, we have plans, but it is an issue of implementation, which I see is one of the issues that we need to address, because we have a government that has now acquired what we call the counties. And on that comes various other stakeholders that come in the government, and we have a lot of plans. We have counties versus the central government. So we need to have a look at the actual structure of government. If some kind of research can be done to see, are they coordinating very well? What else do they need to do? So there's an element of being top heavy in terms of the practices of water management, and also in terms of implementation. So the processes that we go through are quite long. For example, when you have to do an EIA or ECA, you have to go through quite a long process before you can actually implement some things on the ground. So there's need also to look at that, and also need to look at a way in which the management of water is not reactive, but it is more of planned, so that we have data in place so that when somebody needs to implement a project, especially on water, we have the data that is available. So there's more need to go into research, more need to go into looking at the data that is available in the country. For example, we talked about the groundwater. You find that in the semi-arid areas, it's mostly the groundwater that most people fall onto. But at the moment, we don't even understand how much we have, Kenya has as a country. So there's need for a major look at how much water is available, and how much can we use this so that we can adequately address the communities. And the other thing I also noticed that they need also to deal with the communities. The communities need to be enjoined in the planning process from the very word go, not as an afterthought. And as much as we put so much money on the infrastructure, there's also need to also allocate adequate amounts of funding towards the water sector, because it crisscrosses quite across all the other sectors, be it agriculture, manufacturing, taking care of the community health. So this is what is, I think, need to be addressed in terms of policy and governance, and the political structure and government need to come together. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Patrick, for that. And let's pan over to our audience and see what questions are coming from the floor. Tanya, if you could pick them up for us, please.
Yeah, we've just got one that's come in. So I can't quite see the full name, but it's about competing water uses related to diversity in cultural practices along the development corridor, and how does this impede effective water resources management? And many times results in conflicts. How do infrastructural development plans intend to manage this conflict?
Okay, I suppose I would ask Declan to speak to that, because you've done some of this in Asia as well.
This is the sort of number one question in a way, the crunch point. How do you resolve these local level conflicts over resource access, resource use, and the impacts of development? I guess at the planning stage, having rigorous methodologies and approaches to strategic environmental assessment and social assessment, the guidelines for those need to be there and clear, and the organizations who are involved in the infrastructure development need to follow those, and to follow some consultation processes to try and, at the very least, identify what some of the impacts are, and given those impacts, to begin to try to prioritize or reconcile mitigative actions on the basis of those impacts. That's far more easily said than done. I think perhaps my panelists will have a better feel for local level organizations on the ground that perhaps might be both community and government organizations that can be involved in some of those processes, but it's crucial to bring them into the planning process.
Okay, I can pick up, thank you for that. I can pick up two other questions. One is for our presenter, Catherine. Do we have data on the yields from the boreholes along the SGR corridor and their water quality? And then there's another question here that Dr. Okoth, you can address. what are the management systems in place for the water sources developed along the SGR corridor?
Okay, thank you very much for that question. And on the data on water, on the yields from boreholes, I think we have some data with the WRA, though it is scanty, and that is why we are saying we need to really invest more in data management. That is right from collection and storage and making sure that this data is accessible to all. So, and has also Dr. Okoth has also mentioned that groundwater has not been actually, we have not really explored groundwater fully because the groundwater availability has not been fully understood. So we don't know actually how much water is available so that we can be able to use it for the different uses. And there is also the issue on the water quality. I think most of the water is saline in most of the places in Kenya. I think that has been reported that it is mostly saline, and if we could invest on maybe desalinizing of this water, we can explore, we can have more, we can enhance our water supply. So I can say, all I can say about the availability of water yields data is that the data is not sufficient.
Thank you very much, Catherine. And let's go over to Stephen.
Yes, now the water management techniques. One of them is the harvesting of the water from this infrastructure. That is why you can even see the ponds are there. Some of these ponds are being constructed and being handed over to the communities as part of the community responsibility for these projects. Also, during the time of construction of these SGR projects, there were some boreholes which were drilled, and some of them were also handed over to these communities. So one of the best management techniques which can be employed in this area, because there is also the infrastructure is generating a lot of runoff, we can really employ the techniques of harvesting of this water through ponds, and that would really improve the water supply in this area. But there should also be rehabilitation of the areas like tree planting to ensure that the area also is not washed away by soil erosion. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now we have two more questions here, and I'll pass them on to Patrick to take them in one breath. One, because of the issues that you mentioned in your observations. One is looking at the issue of, that development corridors impede effective water resources management, and in many times resulting to conflicts, which could be human-human or human-wildlife. So how is this addressed? And the second is on how we can create an interagency that harmonizes and coordinates data, policy, and information sharing on infrastructure planning. Just take 1 minute to answer as we are constrained by time, and then we move on to closing the session. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Let me just go straight to the one of interagency harmony. When you look at the structure that we have, there is a feeling that there is need for a place, one place that all these ministries can come to and have their plans looked at. And I think maybe the office of the president could have, or maybe already has that element of where government ministries that are related to this, that touch on every aspect, the environment, the ministries of agriculture, manufacturing or industry can come to. So we need a kind of a harmonization or an implementation ministry that will help various compounding issues to come together in harmony. And there's also need to have a one source place where we can get data. That is, I think, very key. If government under its policy has got this policy that the people can access that information, if we can have that information in one place, that will also be ideal. And then along the development corridor, we have different counties that are crisscrossed by the railway or this big project. There's need also for these issues to be brought into this harmonization or implementation kind of arrangement. I think that to me that we'll be able to sort out most of what questions that have been raised here. Data goes to one place and people can be able to collect that data. And data should be something that we do not collect if there's a project, but we collect continuously and then be able to analyze. Just data alone without being analyzed will not be able to give a good policy understanding of what needs to be done. I think that's it for me.
Thank you very much for all your observations. I think now we want to draw to a close, and I want to thank our 3 panelists, first of all, for spending the time to come and share their knowledge and wisdom with us. Thank you, Declan. Thank you, Stephen Okoth. Thank you, Patrick. And I also want to thank our main presenter of the day, Dr. Catherine Sang, and my colleague here at the university. Thank you so much for your very informative and broad presentation today. And I would also like to inform our audience that the recording of Catherine's presentation will be available on the DCP YouTube channel. So if you want to stay up to date with what we are doing in the DCP project, please visit our website. We have lots of resources there. And also follow us on social media. We also have a new publication on the impact assessment for development corridors, and you can get that in our link in chat or visit our website for more details. So before I get to you, audience, we have people behind the scenes who've been helping us in the DCP office. Thank you so much to all of you, Amaya and Tanya and others. And thank you all, the audience, for your attendance today. And really do stay in touch with us. We are happy to share the information that we have. I wish you all a nice day, good morning, afternoon, or evening, wherever you are around the world. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.
We are now free to leave.